Hi, this is Michael Jones. I'm actually going to introduce Michel Boudrias, who's going to moderate this panel. Michel is a board member from TMA Blue Tech. He's a professor at University of San Diego, somebody we've been working very closely with on our educational side, but also looking at innovation as well. So if we could bring up Michel.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the final panel of this morning, where we're going to focus on the future of the vibrant blue economy in the San Diego area. And I have four excellent panelists on this call. I have Congressman Scott Peters, who represents the 52nd District. Scott is my congressman as well. He's been working in this area for a long time and is chair of the Climate Task Force on one of the committees in Congress. We have Rafael Castellanos, who's a port commissioner in San Diego. Rafael is also the chair of the Ports Environmental Advisory Committee. We have Dr. Shalini Vachala, who's the executive director of the San Diego Regional Policy and Innovation Center at the San Diego Foundation. And Deanna Spen, who is the policy director for California Senate President Pro Tem Toni Atkins. What I'd like to do this morning is, start from big and go to local. So I'd like to start with Scott to come in from the national perspective, Deanna from the state perspective, and then Rafael and Shalini from the more local perspective. Our speakers will speak for 8 or 9 minutes, and then hopefully we'll have time for a conversation amongst the group before we end this panel. I want to remind everyone, after this panel, we are moving to Zoom for a roundtable discussion. Hopefully many of you can join us, and we hope to have a dynamic conversation there as well. So Scott, I turn the floor over to you.
Thanks, Michael. It's so good to see you. Can you hear me? Hear me okay? Good. It's good to see you. It's good to see my buddies, and I'm still in DC, but looking forward to getting home today for Thanksgiving. And I'm happy to join TMA Blue Tech and all of you here today to talk about our vibrant blue economy in San Diego. And I want to first start by thanking TMA Blue Tech for the work you do here in San Diego to develop ocean and water technologies. TMA Blue Tech uses education, policy, and technology resources together to promote innovation and economic development right in San Diego, which means jobs and investments in our backyard. And our geography in San Diego serves not just as a beautiful landscape, but as a resource. The water gives us so many opportunities to innovate, find new ways to take care of our environment, and no one knows that better than the folks who are with us today. So I've had the pleasure of visiting several blue businesses here in San Diego. I've seen fascinating operations at places like Blue Nalu, where they're leading in cell-cultured seafood. I'm also the proud founder and co-chair of the Congressional Algae Caucus, where I look to continued advancements happening in San Diego on the algae front. It's my job as a representative in Congress to bolster these efforts and to ensure federal support for these projects. So I thought I'd give you a little rundown on some of the exciting developments that have happened just this week. Earlier this week, I had the honor of attending the signing at the White House of the bipartisan infrastructure deal, otherwise known officially as the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. It's a once-in-a-generation investment in our nation's infrastructure. I can't tell you that I ever thought we'd invest $1 trillion in infrastructure, but we did. It'll help build American competitiveness by rebuilding our nation's hard infrastructure like rail, bridges, and broadband. But it also provides much support for shoring up coastal communities. The PROTECT program includes an at-risk coastal infrastructure grant program, $2.6 billion for coastal ecosystem restoration and flood protection, coastal flood mapping, increased data collection and data sharing, and funding for the National Oceans and Coastal Security Fund, $2.2 billion for the Port Infrastructure Development Program. I know Rafael's happy about that. That contains emission reductions and infrastructure initiatives. Every community in the country will feel the support and effects of this wide-ranging bill, but San Diego's blue economy is included, and it was an honor to help pass this once-in-a-lifetime legislation. I'm still in DC today because we just voted this morning on the House sending the Build Back Better Act to the Senate, and that has not been approved yet. That's going to be worked over a little bit more by some of the senators I know. But we can expect that it will make even more investments in our future and have a similar focus on strengthening and making coastal communities more resilient. Our draft has $6 billion for the National Ocean, Atmospheric, Administration, or NOAA, conservation, restoration, protection of coastal marine habitats, resources to enable coastal communities to prepare for extreme storms and changing conditions, and for projects that contain coastal marine resource dependent communities. $300 million to NOAA to construct, replace, or repair aging facilities like fishery laboratories, and $600 million to the Maritime Administration for projects to support supply chain resilience, the development of offshore wind support infrastructure, and projects to reduce the impact of ports, the adverse impact of ports on the environment. The bill also extends green energy tax credits for marine and hydrokinetic renewable energy facilities and offshore wind, which will be critical technologies as we address the climate crisis. And finally, a relevant provision for our state and region, the bill permanently bans new offshore oil and gas leasing along the entire Atlantic coasts and Pacific coasts and the eastern Gulf of Mexico. So it's a lot of information to process. I know it might be hard to know exactly the difference these measures will make in San Diego, but long story short, we're making sure the federal government lifts up the efforts and initiatives that will help us prosper. We're investing in facilities to withstand our changing climate, making sure institutions have more data than ever to help inform our decision making. We're boosting the creation and use of clean energy, and we're helping our coastal communities adapt so they don't run the risk of being devastated by extreme weather. And we can provide opportunities for economic development as well. So in a district like the one I represent in Congress, you can't lose sight of the efforts to make the community and planet a better place. I'm looking forward to working with you and our blue tech industries here in San Diego to do that just by taking full advantage of one of our most precious natural resources, the ocean, and investing in a promising and sustainable tomorrow. Thanks for having me here today. I look forward to a productive discussion with the rest of the panelists, and we'll leave it there for now.
Great. Thank you, Scott. Deanna, what can you tell us from the state's perspective?
Good morning, everybody. Nice to see you all. I am policy director now for Senator Toni Atkins, but 13 years ago, when the blue tech and the blue economy became the focus of San Diego region, I was policy director for Senator Christine Kehoe. And one of the things that we discovered was the need to have free-flowing information among various levels of government and the Port Tenants Association and the Navy specifically, that controls 40% of San Diego Bay. There was a lot of discussion that took place. The Navy has a lot of ships going in and out of the bay and had concerns at the time about what the impact was going to be of potentially beginning to have the blue economy use land and sea areas in the region. And our office facilitated discussions among the various entities, the federal government, the Navy, various state agencies, and certainly the Port and City of San Diego and other cities around the Bay to talk about sharing information early on and facilitating a clear understanding of what might be cited locally in terms of new companies or new uses of old sites. One of the things that the group relied upon was information from Scripps Institution that has mapped not only the San Diego region of the bays and ocean, but also done mapping of the entire West Coast, and was able to provide significant science-based information on potential impacts and uses along the shoreline and out to sea, and working closely with various departments within the Navy and the Coast Guard, we were able to facilitate discussions that led to pretty good results in terms of a better understanding of what could and should be permitted in the area, and ensuring that access by other agencies that work in the area is maintained. The state has a vested interest in the health of our coast. We've developed 124 separate marine protected areas along the coastline, and several in the southern part of the state, specifically in San Diego County. And the work that the marine protected areas do in protecting offshore and shoreline natural lands and water is critical to the health of the ocean and to the region. We also have various state agencies, from the Coastal Commission to the State Lands Commission, that provide oversight to what can be cited locally and regionally. The local universities, specifically the University of California, San Diego and San Diego State University, do extensive research in the area. And that information is also shared not only with the other agencies, but with the public as well. So there's a good understanding locally of what's happening and the opportunities. Uh, I too have had the opportunity with my boss to visit various new blue economy companies that have started in the area. And it's fascinating the breadth of work that's being done. Just recently, we were able to tour offshore wind generation that is being piloted off of Scripps Institute property in La Jolla. And the state also has a very active Sea Grant program that provides funding for various studies up and down the coast that can include potential uses of our coastline and the ocean. And the interaction that continues to take place between the Navy, the port, the Coast Guard, the cities surrounding San Diego Bay and up the coastline, and SANDAG, the San Diego Association of Governments, which is our local transportation agency, enables a good understanding of the potential for what can happen here, but also what is already happening here, and the support facilities and educational facilities that feed into these new industries. So when Michael Jones and the Maritime Alliance first greeted us all in San Diego with their first conference all those years ago, it started a real synergy locally and a dynamics that has continued today. And I'm happy to be here today and listen to our fellow panelists. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Deanna. Shalini, I'd like to turn to you because you have a regional perspective, and then Raphael will close with you on the more specific focus on the port.
Fantastic. Thanks, Michelle. And it's wonderful to follow Scott and Deanna in this conversation, because I wanted to highlight a few key themes, and I'll start by sharing a little bit about our new center. I am the executive director of the San Diego Regional Policy and Innovation Center. We are a new nonprofit established by the San Diego Foundation in collaboration with the County of San Diego, our regional municipalities, and our regional agencies like the port. Our whole mission is to develop good ways of using the billions of dollars that Scott described, and to work at a level that is bigger than any single municipality and cross-sector. So think of what our work is as the things that are everybody's problem, but no one's specific job. Everything from flood risk and fire risk to sea level rise, where the issues are cross-cutting and the solutions, in order to take advantage of big federal resources, often need to be bigger than the things that any single entity would develop on their own. So regional solutions. So how do we do this kind of work? My background and expertise is as an architect and an engineer, and I had a chance to spend several years in federal government at the Environmental Protection Agency, developing large-scale green and resilient infrastructure projects. And I think there are four pieces to our work that connect the things that you heard from Scott and Deanna. The first is information. When we're talking about coastal resilience, for example, success is often something that doesn't happen. The storm hit, but the community wasn't flooded. The tides rose, but the transportation infrastructure remained in service. In order to design those types of projects effectively, you have to know what you're becoming resilient to. And that requires a regional perspective that helps connect project design to federal resources so the money can be spent well and you can actually show what the benefits are on the ground, especially when those benefits involve something avoided, a damage avoided, a loss avoided. The second piece that's important, I think, for the current moment, especially in the work of our center, is recognizing, and I want to applaud Scott and the folks in the House, is that um, there is more money available for innovation, for transformational investments in our community than there has been since President Roosevelt. This is a once in a generation chance for us to think differently and design differently. And I really want to applaud Michael and the team at TMA Blue Tech here, because being able to do that well takes vision. And that vision depends on creating a sense of how do you invest in whole new sectors from whole cloth, but do it in a way that builds on the familiar and creates the space for real innovation. So thinking about all of the ways in which we could do small coastal projects, how do you connect that and really make a string of pearls that creates wider benefits than any of the little pieces would on their own? The third piece of what I'd like to talk about is integration and evaluation. When we think about working at a regional level to promote a vibrant, long-term blue economy, we're relying on that vision of a blue economy. We're thinking about the money and the information. What is it that we need to know? What problems are we trying to solve? And then developing cross-sector solutions. So how do you connect, for example, upstream investments in green stormwater management that improve coastal water quality, that reduce runoff and erosion, and that protect critical assets? Those are the kinds of projects that the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and knock wood, hopefully the Build Back Better bill, will support in spades. But in order to take advantage of those and effectively mobilize at a regional level to be able to use this money well, we really have to think in an integrated way and design projects that are multi-benefit, cross-sector, and deliver and integrate blue economy wins within a larger framework of how we think about transportation infrastructure and coastal resilience and large-scale water sector improvements. And so I think these four pieces, vision, information about what success looks like, so having a clear baseline and way of knowing that we're making progress, project design and integration, and then the money are very much where our work at the San Diego Regional Policy and Innovation Center, we see ourselves as the glue to be able to raise the level of ambition at a regional level, to design new and transformational projects, and to be able to attract resources to the region to really both build up and maintain the successes that have been developed here over the blue economy over the last decade. So I will stop there and thank you to Michael and Michelle and the whole panel.
Thank you, Shalini. So, Raphael, you've been a port commissioner for a while. The port has done some great things and has a great local and national reputation. So how do you see the port fitting in, and what's the role of an agency like yours in this vibrant blue economy?
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the invitation and the opportunity to speak with all of the panelists and to everyone listening. This is something I'm really excited about. When I was chairman of the port in 2018, my theme was ocean optimism. You know, the belief, the idea that the ocean economy, the blue economy, is one of our greatest sources of opportunity here in the San Diego region. And I know that I'm preaching to the choir. But I want to talk about some actual projects, what the port is doing, what our role is, and why we have a very unique role, just like everybody does as part of this cluster. All of us are doing different things, collaborating in partnership. That's a theme that I've heard here from the other panelists. And so I'm going to emphasize that throughout this presentation. Right away, you see all of some key partners, TMA Blue Tech. Michael Jones, thank you for all of your work and your vision. Our educational institutions, our workforce institutions, our other government institutions. And our vision at the port is that we would like to someday have the San Diego Bay known as the Blue Technology Bay, because of what we are able to foster, because of what we have, what we can provide, both water, coast, planning expertise, and regulatory expertise, and financial resources. So if you could please move to the next slide. So what's special about the port? Well, obviously, we're the blue heart of the region. We have water, we have lots of water, we have a lot of coastline. We've got 34 miles of coastline under our jurisdiction and about 14,000 acres of land, both coastal land and the bay bottom, with various regulatory and land and water use planning powers throughout that entire region. So that gives us some very, very unique natural and artificial infrastructure. Next slide, please. We can't do this without a lot of wonderful people. I want to recognize our who we call our best team at the Port of San Diego. This is our Blue Economy Strike Team. It's a multidisciplinary team of folks from our Planning and Environment Department, Conservation. We hire 2 full-time employees to focus specifically on aquaculture and blue tech. And we also have government affairs, our legal department, and we have a California Sea Grant State Fellow as well. Thank you, Deanna, for your help with all of that. Next slide, please. So let's get into the projects and our Blue Economy Incubator. In 2016, we created this incubator. We committed up to $5 million to support startup companies in the blue economy space. We were looking to do this for a number of different reasons. One is that we're a self-sustaining agency. We don't collect any taxes. Everything we do is a public-private partnership with ground tenants and the maritime business, the cruise ship industry, the shipyards, the cargo terminals. So we need to generate revenue. So how do we diversify our economic portfolio to make us more resilient to economic conditions like what we just went through, right? A pandemic. Additionally, we are trying to address certain challenges at the Port of San Diego, many of which are environmental challenges, sea level rise, pollution, etc. So how can we sort of try to achieve and create multiple co-benefits? So we currently have 9 demonstration projects deployed throughout the Port of San Diego and the Bay. There you can see little icons. I'll talk about a few of these here momentarily. Of the 9 projects, 3 are actually from foreign countries, foreign companies. In the right, that little pie chart there, you see that about half of the projects are focused on environmental remediation technologies or aquaculture, restorative aquaculture, some infrastructure, and then just straight up blue tech and straight aquaculture. Next slide, please. Just to emphasize, again, this is a bay-wide collaboration process. We have folks starting in the office at the port with our partners, our companies, working on the whiteboard there, to actually all throughout the bay with the various projects, the equipment that's necessary, both natural and artificial. Next slide, please. So here's a project that I'm very excited about. This is an Israeli company. It's called eConcrete. They have developed this bioenhancing concrete that they manufacture these blocks. They're like Lego blocks, except that each of them weigh about 3 tons. And you need a giant marine barge to install them. And what we've done is we have a project right now where we have 2 sections of about 70 feet long each, with these interlocking units that mimic tidal pools. So they create a bioskin around them that makes for a more resilient coastline and also generates a local ecosystem, which has multiple benefits, right? Carbon sink, restorative benefits from the critters, just overall ecological health and restorative services. And we, if this company is successful, which we think they will be, we will be able to participate in sales of this particular technology throughout the state of California for a period of time, sort of achieving our economic goals, and also helping to stimulate the economy by supporting this company, helping them with not just the site for them to deploy this project, but also helping with all of the permitting and regulatory approvals, State Lands Commission, Coastal Commission, Army Corps of Engineers, et cetera, et cetera. Next slide, please. Here we have an aquaculture demonstration project. This is our partner, Sunken Seaweed, a couple of researchers from San Diego State University who are, they've developed a sustainable seaweed lab and also are engaged in 3D farming off of one of our piers, the Grape Street Pier, where we have these, columns of seaweed that are at different depths where they get different light, and therefore they're experimenting with what grows best at what depth and what for. Culinary seaweed, commercial seaweed for other uses, producing products, feed for livestock, etc., as well as the restorative benefits of seaweed when it comes to also absorbing carbon and water remediation. Next slide, please. Here we have a very interesting technology developed by NASA, a NASA proprietary technology that has been licensed to some former NASA engineers who are now entrepreneurs. These are called ecospheres. They are these little spears that go into the sediment, contaminated sediment. They absorb PCBs and then essentially deconstruct them chemically to remediate the contaminated sediment. We can go under piers and docks and other very difficult to reach places that can't be easily remediated, either through dredging or just because there's a lack of physical space to accomplish it. So we have a number of these deployed throughout the Bay as well, measuring their success so that they can also scale up this technology and go to market, and while at the same time helping us achieve our goals of reducing pollution. Next slide, please. Here you see, talked about some of these projects, but we have others that are truly nature-based solutions. For example, we have an artificial oyster reef, a native oyster living shoreline project. Right now, we call them little oyster hotels, which are these sort of bioconcrete little domes that recruit oysters, and then will create an artificial oyster reef that grows in size and then helps mitigate coastal flooding and erosion, helps restore wetlands, and serves as a buffer against sea level rise and the damage that it can cause. We also have a mitigation bank that we are restoring former wetlands. That too will help accommodate sea level rise flooding and also provide environmental benefits that we are also monetizing by selling mitigation credits to developers. So also helps our bottom line and helps the environment, helps us achieve our goals. Next slide, please. I just want to finish with these last two slides, just really emphasizing what a collaborative effort all of this is. It is multi partners from all over the county. Here you see a number of the folks who are involved just here in the county. But on the next slide, you will see sort of regionally, even more partners, and of course nationally. In 2015, we did a marine spatial planning effort with State Lands and NOAA to develop a marine spatial planning tool. Basically, in any given area in the Bay or in the coast, what is happening there in sort of a 3D view, so that we could understand the potential conflicting uses, what is possible, so that we could get a good sense of what the opportunities are and what the challenges are. So we can't do any of this without the help of all of our partners. So thank you very much. That's the presentation.
Thank you very much, Rafael, and thank you to my whole panel, because not only did you give us a lot of information, you kept it short, so we have a lot of time to talk amongst ourselves and hopefully to answer some of the questions coming in. I'd like to pose the first question to all of you. I'd like to hear all your opinions. of course, I'm a little biased as a college professor working with undergraduates who want to get involved in the blue economy. One of the other universities, as many of you are non-San Diego people may not know that there are 5 universities that are all locally in San Diego that all have some components working on the ocean or the blue economy per se. So my first question to all of you is, how do we prepare the next generation to be involved in this? How do we get the workforce development connected to all this great work? And it's come up at multiple panels. The panel just before us, Liz Whiteman talked about how we need to train them differently as well, right? As an oceanographer by training, I could go play in the mud all day long with some of Raphael's projects. But how do we make that a broader thing, a real connection between the scientists, the economists, the policy people? So I'd like to hear from each of you, and let's start in reverse order. So, actually, let's start where we started to begin with. Scott, what do you think about education? I know you've been involved for a long time. How do we get the young generations from the kindergartners all the way to the college students involved?
Well, I actually think we got a pretty good infrastructure in San Diego in terms of the higher education. You can't really beat Scripps Institute of Oceanography for having a resource here and expertise. Your own program does this. You have EPIC at USD Law School, and we're talking a little bit about the San Diego Foundation. That's been back to 2010 when you had the climate initiative. That's been an effort to get awareness, through the philanthropy community. I actually think that's the harder infrastructure. The easier thing is getting kids interested in this. We know that naturally children are interested in the environment, but we also know that young voters, this has become their number one issue. One of the things that gives me some hope in Congress, by the way, is that for the first time in 2018, we saw Republicans notice that that climate was an issue at the ballot box, and so now you see more Republicans interested in getting involved in climate policy. It was always it polled well, but it was never the reason someone pulled the lever for one candidate or another. Now they see that it is, and the biggest growing class of climate voters is actually young evangelicals, which are so critical to the Republican base. So I think getting awareness among young people is the easier thing, and taking advantage of the infrastructure we have that's very unique in San Diego is something that I think we can do, but it's easier than having to recreate it or create it from the beginning.
Great. Thank you, Scott. Deanna?
Actually, I agree with Scott that there is a lot of access to the ocean and the shoreline, but it's really pretty limited to the higher income, middle income communities. The social justice factor and the lack of ability for families in certain communities to never get to the ocean until maybe they're 18 or 19 years old means that you don't develop at the age of 8 this fascination with all the little crawly things that are around the seaweed eating on the shoreline, and swimming in the water with the grunion late at night. It's those kind of experiences that fascinate kids and help them take a pathway that ultimately can end up at the university level, focusing on everything blue, and whether it's new technology or preserving what's there or helping restore what's been lost. So part of the problem is, and we struggle with this all the time at the state, that we pass bond measures to encourage people to come visit the ocean, and we can't spend the money on anything other than bricks and mortar. So we can buy a bus, but we can't pay a driver. We can't pay the insurance. Mm-hmm. And that means that we rely on nonprofits, other nonprofits, to help, a primary nonprofit be able to transport kids to the beach. How simple should that be? And I continue to meet with, that we have a couple of great nonprofits locally that do have transportation programs, not only to the beach, but to our forests. and because it's an equal problem of transportation.
Yes.
And I speak with these kids who are 16, 17 years old, and they went to the beach for the first time that week. First time. And they live 9 miles from the ocean.
We're going to get back to coordination in a bit.
Problem. Yeah.
Shalini, your perspective.
I think I would fully echo and build on everything Scott and Deanna just said. Access and awareness and equity are so important. I think the piece that I would add here is that my experience working with elementary age through higher education on getting engaged on issues like climate change is really the interest is in problem solving. And so connecting it up to how your community is better off, whether that's, my community has black mold from flooded homes, and if you're thinking about major storms, or if you're looking at access to healthy food, right? How many young kids have eaten seafood-based meals? The awareness and access piece I found is most effective when you can connect young people across the chain from kindergarten all the way through higher education in problem solving. And Michelle, I think this is where your team has really excelled, because you have taken this interdisciplinary approach that is often, it's the most attractive way to get deeply engaged in problems. And it's also pushed out of us when you get further and further into educational systems, right? Where you get siloed by the disciplines. And so I think having more programs that are problem solving oriented is going to help build a workforce generation that is less about credentialing and more about a portfolio of outcomes that they can help create to reduce the impacts of climate change in communities they care about, and really practically be able to say, we did that. And I think that reinforces itself in terms of building new skills and continuously learning, because these problems aren't static. The interest has to be sustained in order for the skills to shift, and for the workforce of the future to be one that grows with the challenges that we have, rather than assuming that once an architect, always an architect.
I couldn't agree more. Raphael.
So all really great comments. I want to, I guess, sort of piggyback on what Deanna was really, focused on. And I want to thank Congressman Peters, who was one of my predecessors at the Port Commission, Port Commissioner Emeritus, for his efforts in helping the port establish an environmental fund. With that environmental fund, hundreds of thousands of dollars every year are deployed for various environmental projects. But one of the very important things that we fund is an environmental education program, where we support nonprofits like Ocean Connectors or the Ocean Discovery Institute, which take these kids from these disadvantaged communities, like a community where I grew up, and take them to the bay and the ocean, where they have hands-on experiences with science and technology, and they're developing a love for this. And I mean, doesn't a blue job sound cool? Do you want to be a marine spatial planner someday? Do you want to be an underwater robotics technician? Do you want to be an aqua farmer? And then all of the jobs that we haven't even invented yet, right? There's so much opportunity and possibility. So we support those nonprofits. They come and give presentations to the Environmental Advisory Committee routinely, let us know what they're doing. And you see the photos of these kids with these giant smiles on their faces, experiencing the natural environment, the ocean, and the bay. We also help bus kids from the Chula Vista Elementary School District to field trips to the Living Coast Discovery Center at the Port of San Diego, where they also get to interact with the natural environment and develop a love for marine life and other natural resources here in the region. So that's very important. Right before the pandemic hit, we were also starting to establish another very innovative partnership with the Chula Vista Elementary School District, which was a blue pod, which was essentially to bring kids to the port, the administration building as well, right? So that they could shadow the best team, the Blue Economy Strike team, and others who are working in this space, so they can see, oh, okay, so this is what it's like on a day-to-day basis. This is cool. It's not like my mom in a fast food restaurant or in some other laborer job, but they get to see, wow, people work with computers, and it's like, temperature controlled in here, and everything else. It's really, really nice, and people treat you well, and you actually make a good living. And then, of course, taking these kids to the water again to interact with these technologies and the people working on these projects. So we've got to put in the funding here to support the people doing the work, to expose the kids and go out and sort of spread the blue gospel, right? At the end of the day, which, if you don't know, you don't know. And we just need to expose kids at a young age to what's possible, get them interested. This is exciting stuff. It's fascinating stuff. Anybody who hears about it is going to be interested in it, and little kids with imaginations running wild are prime targets for conversion to what we're talking about here.
Thank you all. I'm going to add 2 comments before I ask my next question, one of which is, since I hang out with 20-year-olds all the time, I want to reconnect to something that Shalini said and others, is they, first of all, are deeply engaged in social justice. It's no longer just an environmental perspective. It's how does it affect disadvantaged communities? How can we work there? This has now become such a key component to everybody in this field. As an example, as we are hiring new faculty, it is a requirement in our hiring practices to look at how they're going to connect to that. So I do want to say for everybody else in the audience, this has now become part and parcel of what is needed in the environmental space. The second thing I want to add as a comment is something that comes off what Shalini said, which is the students don't just want to hear about the facts. They want to know what they can do. It's very much what can I do on the ground? And that could mean anything. It could be a business decision. It could be a policy decision. It could be a science decision. Universities have started to do things like we do at USD, which we call Campus as a Living Lab, where the students are working on real projects rather than just do another lab report that I have now read 300 times. I much rather have them do something that's going to make a difference. I want to piggyback on all 4 of your comments with my next question, and I don't have any other ones coming in, but I do want to hear your perspectives. We now have, Scott, good news on at least one of the 2 big bills. I know there's some, and yes, we're all doing the same thing. We know there's some state efforts, Deanna, that are support. The port has some funding for projects. I know Shalini and I have been working on proposals for the region. My question is, first, how do we coordinate our efforts? Because I think if we don't coordinate the efforts, we're fighting each other to help build the region. That's number one. And number 2, how do we set up situations where it's real work, real jobs, internships, externships, shadowing? I mean, Raphael, your idea of seeing someone doing the work in the field, it's really important. So I'd like to hear your perspectives on how do we coordinate the money coming in, and how do we make it more into the real space rather than just a small project or a one day at the beach. And I'm going to start in reverse. I'm going to start with Raphael this time and then end with Scott.
Yeah, so that's a great question. And when you talk about all of the partners, everybody collaborating, that's sort of a double-edged sword, like you just mentioned, right? Is that so many people are doing so much stuff that, and if nobody knows what anybody else is doing, or you just kind of hear about it, it can almost be overwhelming. And lead to opportunities slipping through the cracks. And so I think leadership is important. A regional strategy is important. The Maritime Alliance has done so much great work, and I believe, and Michael Jones, can speak to this, but the Maritime Alliance actually, I believe, prepared a sort of strategy up in the Seattle area, which established a framework for cooperation. So that also presumably would create some sort of clearinghouse for information and opportunities so that everybody knows what else is happening. And that requires all of these various partners to put, input into the clearinghouse. And, using technology, ideally, we would all be able to communicate and sort of keep track of what's happening where and what. Like, that's what you would want to do if you're trying to do and scale something up. That's what companies do. That's what planners do. We should be doing it as a cluster so that there's more strategic focus and there are pathways and we know how to achieve goals and that we can measure those things so that if a grant opportunity pops up on somebody's radar, it's on everybody's radar. And ideally, we can then collaborate quickly and jump on top of it and deploy and execute the resources and the personnel to be as competitive as possible regionally. I think that's important, and we should try to do that. And then with respect to, the kids and same thing, right? That framework should provide for what are going to be the strategies and what are going to be the tactics to create pathways to plug these kids into these various levels that we will develop as part of the framework. I mean, that's what I think would be really great to see. We need somebody to start putting pen to paper and going around and sort of developing that framework, right? And we should probably all chip in a little bit. Maybe the congressman could, bring home a little uni or whatever the maritime equivalent of pork is to help the effort like that, right? So we could try to do something like that. That's just me riffing here on some thoughts.
Raphael, I like the fact that we can get some uni. I think that'd be a good way to make it go forward.
$3 million for a week to ask for more money,
Shalini, your perspective.
I'm glad you jumped in, Congressman Peters. I think one of the lovely things about the moment that we're in is that coordination there's a real set of forcing events for coordination, right? And, as a couple $1 trillion is not chump change, and really using that money well. I think we're in a different time than we have been previously, where it's not a zero-sum game of competing for this money. It actually is about bringing together and stitching together larger and more transformational investments. So I think we have a different baseline to motivate coordination. And I'm a big fan of forcing events where you have to coordinate about something rather than convene generically. I think that leads to much more constructive engagement within a region. And so, Michelle, the conversations that we've had with partners across the region, Raphael with the team, the best team at the port, I had no idea they had that acronym. I love it even more. There have been such practical discussions because of things like the funding opportunities that are coming out from the Recovery Act, from the infrastructure bill, and hopefully from Build Back Better. And this type of opportunity is at a scale that I think we will need new ways of coordinating. It's not the same old frameworks of kind of checking boxes and everybody taking their little piece of the pie. This will take new ways of working together to get integrated solutions in place that are a whole order of magnitude bigger than things that might have been done in previous decades. So I think the momentum is there and the forcing events are there. So they're the right ingredients to shift how we do coordination.
I appreciate that. Deanna?
This past year, Senator Atkins' primary piece of legislation was Senate Bill 1, and that has to do with helping the state coastal areas prepare for sea level rise and the direct impacts of climate change. It comes with a recommendation of $100 million a year being made available as local grants for cities, counties, agencies, and nonprofits. There's a whole list of who would be eligible. And it has to do with encouraging areas to start their planning and implementation of what they're going to do to deal with sea level rise. We've already seen impacts in various areas of the state. And we need to encourage communities to come together and have all the stakeholders participate in a plan and to, decide now's the time to be ready for what's coming soon or what is already here. Talk to Imperial Beach, where they experience regular flooding. every time there's a king tide or a storm surge. And we're seeing that same sort of impact in Encinitas and Carlsbad, in Del Mar, where the bluffs are being systematically destroyed daily and impacting our major rail line in the region. And so on the November 2022 ballot, there will be a bond measure that the public will have an opportunity to vote for that will fund this $100 million a year into the foreseeable future so that we can, at the local level, at the regional level, better prepare for what's here and what's coming. And for those of us who have experienced in the last couple of years the new drenching rains that we get, where in one day we get almost a season's worth of rain in a particular area. I mean, it's not just sea level rising, it's also the skies opening and causing major flood impacts to areas that are not prepared for them. And so there's a lot that needs to be done. And Senator Atkins wants to empower the local organizations and jurisdictions to come up with plans to directly address what we know is coming.
Thank you. Scott.
So two things I want to say before we finish. First of all, thanks to someone for mentioning Ocean Discovery Institute, which is a remarkable institution we have for engaging young people in these issues, and unique and award-winning. And I should have mentioned it earlier. Also, I should mention too, in terms of oceans, that one of our priorities, obviously, as a delegation, is addressing the remarkable catastrophic contamination around the Mexico border. We've made some good progress. We have some prospects, but I want to make sure that we said that. In terms of collaboration, this is something that San Diego is really good at. People like Raphael and his staff at the port, folks at the city, they know what some of the tasks ahead of them are, and they're pretty good at looking ahead to federal and state money for support. We'll need to do that as well. And I think that the nonprofits, similarly, we should be in conversation with them, very intentional communication about how we can make sure that we support these efforts. In San Diego, we don't have the heft of LA or the Bay Area necessarily, but we pretty much punch above our weight in terms of competing for this grant money from the state and from the federal government. So I expect that to continue, but it's a dedicated awareness of what the tasks are and communication among various entities about how to cooperate and get things done. And we've shown well in the past, but I would just say, given the opportunity ahead of us and the amount of money being invested, this is a time to double down and really put our heads together.
One quick comment and then final words from each of you. When we talk about groups like ODI and the other groups that have worked in San Diego, one of the great examples to follow up on Scott's collaboration perspective is ODI is staffed by USD students. ODI has worked with people in City Heights and worked at the port and really bring up the fact that first generation kids have a chance to be in a STEM discipline. And so I think what we see already is there's been inherent collaboration across the board. And I just think it's important for us to make sure we continue that. So my question for each of you, you have a minute. What brings you optimism or hope for the future in San Diego, for the future of the blue economy in general, to close out our conversation? And I'll start with Scott.
I think one of the things I've noticed about San Diego, and I'll say it again, is that's different from Washington, D.C., is the culture of innovation. It's a place where we're not scared of tomorrow. We're looking forward to what tomorrow will bring. We're excited about that. We're not holding grudges, looking backwards, which is often what happens in Washington, D.C. It's something that just comes naturally to us and we take for granted. But combining some resources with some brain power and thinking about the ocean as the next frontier, San Diego is the place to handle that. And I'm quite confident we're going to see some remarkable things in the coming years and decades.
Thank you. Deanna.
It's very exciting for Senator Atkins and me to see the new technologies that are actually being implemented within the state And right now, a lot of the focus is on offshore wind generation and also looking at using waves to generate energy to replace the polluting forms of energy that we currently have. And those are real priorities for the state these days.
Thank you. Shalini.
I think I would agree with the things that were said before and also add two things that give me hope. One, this is a region where folks are outdoors. They're connected to the environment in areas that you don't always have that. I think it's easy to forget that that's unique. But having grown up along the Great Lakes, and moved to San Diego 8 years ago, I still appreciate that. I appreciate how much people are connected to the ocean, the mountains, just in general aware of our region. And that's the first thing. I think that the second thing is that there's a real get it done ethic in the region that's very different than talking about issues. And that, to me, is an enormous source of hope and being able to develop solutions to problem solve and make good use of billions of dollars of federal money.
Raphael.
So, as I said, my chairman's theme a couple of years ago was ocean optimism. So I'm super optimistic about what's possible here. I think that there are we have real, we already had a cluster and have had it for a very long time, one of the biggest clusters in the world, this blue cluster. But what I think you've seen developing with folks like Michael Jones and Congressman Peters and Senator Atkins and former county supervisor Greg Cox and others is real vision and visionary leadership and talking about that, which sort of gels the cluster even more. And I think what we're seeing now is real visible results of that. And I think the port is a really great example of that because we have these demonstration projects. You can go on Harbor Island and there's a little sidewalk there and walk along and you can see these e-concrete blocks that have been deployed that now have all these little critters inside of these artificial tidal pools. And so now you can see it, right? And more, whereas before it's, we have this cluster, but there's office space in Mira Mesa or Kearney Mesa and all over, but it was like an invisible cluster. But now it's starting to be visible, and that is a representation of what's happening here, a visible, observable representation. And when you start to see that, that gives me great hope. That gives me optimism. That, it starts to display the possibilities for not just those who really know about it, but for others, right, who didn't know about it. And I think that's real progress moving in the right direction. And that's why the port, we like to say, it's going to be the Blue Tech Bay, just like the Santa Clara Valley became known as the Silicon Valley. The San Diego Bay, we're going to be the Blue Tech Bay, right? It's happening. We're going to do it. And, thanks to everyone and all of their efforts to help get us there.
Well, I was going to say it was your last set of comments. I'm just going to read a question and then just if you have a reaction, that's fine. One of the things that came out is it's very clear based on our conversation that there have already been efforts to coordinate in this basis, and there are more and more coming up. And I think, Shalini, your point about the fact that we actually have a problem to solve, not just coordinating for coordinating's sake. So one of the questions is, do we view San Diego as a role model? Can we be the example for other groups, other clusters on the East Coast and the Gulf of Mexico? And any one of you can take that, but based on the fact that, Scott, we can work well together and we're not afraid, is that a model that we should be exporting to the rest of the country?
I absolutely think this is a remarkable place of collaboration and innovation in general. And you see it the way the governments work together. You see it the way businesses have this kind of co-opetition. And I don't know what quite it's born out of, but it's remarkable. And I think other places have certain characteristics, but I just haven't seen the whole game anywhere like San Diego. So, and it's hard to explain to people, but it's really exciting. And I think it is a role model. Yes.
Shalini.
I think, Michelle, yeah, I'd love to add to that because one of our core partnerships at the Policy and Innovation Center is with the Brookings Institution in Washington,
Right.
D.C. And Brookings has lifted up our region as a model for how these things get done. And what's exciting is, you look at the county and we're bigger than 20 states. So we can model things that reflect state level policies and municipal work and also cross sector innovations. So I absolutely think that, and we're already getting those requests and that feedback through our partners at Brookings. So it's a lovely validation.
Well, I want to thank all of you. This has been a stimulating conversation. I'd like to thank Scott, Shalini, Deanna, and Raphael for telling their stories, for answering the questions. I invite you all to join us in the roundtable room if you want to have more conversations with all the rest of the panelists. Thank you very much, and I'm glad we have our champions to help us move forward and be the role model for the blue economy in the country.
Thanks, Michelle. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, all.
Thank you.